The Chicago Sky didn't just trade Angel Reese, they practically threw her out the door like a franchise trying to erase a mistake before it got any uglier. And that's the part people keep dancing around because it completely destroys the fake superstar narrative her supporters have been trying to force on the basketball world ever since she entered the league. Think about this carefully. If Angel Reese was really the untouchable, generational, franchise-changing player people claimed she was, then why did Chicago send her to Atlanta for what basically looks like future scratch-off tickets and a second-round shrug? 2 late first-round picks and a second-round swap for a 2-time All-Star? For the so-called rebounding queen? For the player ESPN and social media spent 2 years packaging like she was the face of women's basketball outside of Caitlin Clark? That is not how teams treat real stars. That is how teams get rid of players they no longer believe are worth the chaos. That is how front offices move when they've seen enough behind the scenes and decide that whatever is happening off the stat sheet is costing more than anything the box score can pretend to give back. Because once you strip away the viral clips, the photo shoots, the fake icon branding, and the non-stop online protection squad, what did Angel Reese actually bring Chicago that translated into winning? Nothing. Not maybe. Not it depends. Nothing. The Sky didn't get better with her. They got worse. That's the reality nobody wants to say out loud because it sounds too brutal, but the win column doesn't care about your followers, your podcast clips, your brand deals, or how many times people scream double-double on television like it's some sacred basketball achievement. Chicago brought her in with all the hype in the world, all the noise, all the attention, all the she's changing the game energy, and what happened? The team kept losing. Then they lost even more. And somehow people still expected the front office to sit there and act like nothing was wrong. This wasn't a franchise ascending. This was a franchise sinking while one player kept getting praised for stats that looked better on social media than they did in actual basketball reality. Because once you look closely, a lot of that production starts falling apart under real scrutiny. Those rebounding numbers everyone kept worshipping? A huge portion of them came from her own missed shots near the rim, the exact kind of empty stat padding that inflates headlines while doing absolutely nothing to elevate a team. She'd miss a close shot, grab it back, miss again, grab it again, and suddenly the stat sheet made it look like dominance when in reality it was often just inefficient chaos disguised as productivity. That's not elite basketball. That's not franchise basketball. That's not the kind of play that changes a losing culture. It's the kind of play that tricks casual viewers into thinking effort automatically equals impact. But effort without efficiency, without spacing, without playmaking, without winning, that's not greatness. That's noise. And Chicago finally stopped pretending otherwise. Her field goal percentage was brutal for a player living around the basket. Her outside shot was basically non-existent. Defenses had no reason to respect her spacing, which meant she constantly clogged the floor instead of opening it up. She wasn't bending defenses. She wasn't elevating teammates. She wasn't running offense. She wasn't making life easier for the people around her. She was simply occupying possessions, consuming touches, and giving fans a stat line they could tweet about while the team kept stacking losses. That's the kind of thing bad organizations talk themselves into for too long, and it looks like Chicago finally snapped out of it. And now the trade tells the truth louder than any press release ever could. The Sky were not trying to maximize Angel Reese's value because they were no longer operating from a place of belief. They were operating from a place of relief. Relief that the experiment was over. Relief that the drama was somebody else's problem. Relief that they no longer had to keep forcing the world to believe something they themselves had clearly stopped buying into. And once you connect that to the bigger story, the whole thing gets even more revealing, because this collapse didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened while Caitlin Clark was doing the exact opposite in Indiana. While Reese was being propped up by headlines and controversy, Clark was out there actually transforming a franchise. That's what makes this whole thing impossible to ignore. One player arrived and immediately elevated everyone around her, turned teammates into better versions of themselves, made the offense smarter, faster, cleaner, and more dangerous, and dragged a long-dead playoff team back into relevance. The other player arrived with non-stop branding, endless media defense, and a manufactured rivalry designed to force her into the same conversation, and her team got worse. That's not hate. That's not bias. That's basketball truth. Caitlin Clark's impact was undeniable because you could actually see it everywhere, in the pace, in the passing, in the spacing, in the confidence of her teammates, in the wins, in the records, in the fear she put into defenses, and in the way the entire franchise suddenly looked alive again. Angel Reese's impact, meanwhile, had to be explained to people. Constantly. Defended. Reframed. Protected. Interpreted. Excused. That's the difference between a real basketball engine and a media-created identity. One player forced the league to adjust to her talent. The other forced the media to keep adjusting the story around her limitations. And once Chicago looked at all of it, the inefficiency, the fit issues, the lack of offensive evolution, the shrinking returns, and the reality that this team was going absolutely nowhere, they made the decision franchises make when they've privately admitted the truth long before the public catches up: move on now, before the value drops even more, before the locker room gets worse, before the rebuild gets poisoned, and before the player's reputation becomes impossible to separate from the team's future. That's not a blockbuster built around hope. That's an escape hatch built around exhaustion. And if the basketball concerns weren't already enough to make Chicago hit the eject button, the off-court and locker room mess turned this from a difficult decision into an inevitable one. Because once the trust inside a team starts cracking, the numbers stop mattering almost immediately. That's where this story goes from disappointing to downright radioactive. A lot of players can survive bad shooting. A lot of players can survive ugly fit issues. A lot of young stars can survive growing pains. What teams do not survive well is a player who starts becoming bigger than the locker room for all the wrong reasons. And that's exactly what this started looking like. Piece by piece, incident by incident, quote by quote, it became harder and harder to defend the idea that Angel Reese was helping build anything in Chicago besides tension, frustration, and public dysfunction. The pattern kept stacking up until the front office had to face a brutal question: are we actually building around this, or are we trying to survive it? Because there's a massive difference between a confident young star demanding excellence and a player constantly dragging drama into every corner of the organization. And once that line gets crossed, it changes everything. Reports, public comments, locker room friction, visible frustration, and repeated moments of unnecessary chaos painted the picture of a team that wasn't simply underperforming. It was internally draining itself, trying to manage one personality that kept creating more noise than solutions. When you publicly throw teammates under the bus, when you start talking like you're above the roster while the team is losing, when you send messages that make veterans feel disrespected and younger players feel divided, you are not leading. You are detonating chemistry in slow motion. And that's the part a lot of fans refuse to understand because they confuse attention with authority. Just because someone dominates social media doesn't mean they dominate respect inside a professional locker room. In fact, sometimes it does the opposite. And if even a fraction of what leaked around Chicago is true, then this trade wasn't just about fit, it was about survival. It was about the organization deciding it had reached the point where keeping Angel Reese was more dangerous than moving her for a weak return. That is a devastating thing to say about a player who was marketed like a cornerstone, but the move itself says it louder than words ever could.